On today's episode of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards, our guest this week is Jim Marshall, a polymathic scholar and autodidact who has devoted over 50,000 hours to the study and practice of multiple dimensions of human development. We are going to discuss his work with Septemics, a unique, original, revolutionary, and transformative work of social science and psychological philosophy. This week's topic will be a lab for your mind. Let's join this week's guest, Jim Marshall, and your host, Melvin E. Edwards.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to this edition of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thank you for joining me on this week's storytelling journey. As you heard in the intro, our guest this week is Jim Marshall. Hello, Jim, and thank you for joining me on today's podcast.
Hi, Mel. Good to see you.
Good to see you. So on this episode, we're going to take a journey to the edge of human potential. This will be a blind journey for me because I'm very new to this concept. So Jim Marshall is the author of Septemics, which he calls, quote, a unique, original, revolutionary, and transformative work of social science and psychological philosophy. I've always been interested in philosophy and psychology, but I've never considered them as a singular concept, so this will be fascinating for me too. So was Septemics something you created or
Yes.
something that you discovered that already existed in some other form?
Well, let me put it to you this way. I am the discoverer of hitherto unknown natural phenomena, which greatly aid in the understanding of people, from which I created a revolutionary philosophic system called Septemics and published it into the book Septemics, Hierarchies of Human Phenomena.
Okay. And when was that book published?
4 years ago.
Okay. So you've said that book is more of a textbook than a coffee table book. So
Absolutely.
For those who are casually curious, can you tell us what Septemics is in
Sure.
easy to understand terms?
Sure. Septemics is a philosophical science based on the fact that many phenomena related to humans occur in a sequence of 7 levels. Literally, the word septemics means of or pertaining to 7. Septemics comprises a collection of scales or sequences, each of which breaks down various human phenomena into a hierarchy of 7 steps. There are 35 such scales, each of which is unique, and together they span the spectrum of human experience, by which I mean any problem, dilemma, situation, difficulty, etc., that any person has that has anything to do with people can successfully be analyzed by one or more of these scales, usually more than one.
Okay. I'll be asking for a little more detail as we go through this conversation.
Right.
So would you consider this more of an art or a science?
Well, it depends on what you mean by it. Certainly, there was an artistic element in writing the book, because writing is an art. But as I said, it's a philosophical science. So it is equally philosophy and science. This is an entirely new subject. This subject did not exist before I found it. So the book is a textbook on a new subject. And it is a subject that will dramatically improve your life if you take advantage of it.
All right. Have you approached any professors about teaching this as a college course?
No. In general, what I knew before I published the book, having gone to school for 28 years, is that academics are insular. They each lives in his own box. And each of these people has spent his lifetime developing a skill set for that box. So if you come to them and say, I have something outside your box, they say, take a hike. In general, people don't want to get out of their boxes. But when you're talking about the academic community, this is even stronger because there's a lot of ego involved in it, and they're very busy. Like if you take a guy who has, let's say, a doctorate in psychology, okay? He knows an awful lot about psychology. That's what he wants to talk about. That's what he wants to teach. And if you say, well, I have this new thing, they say goodbye. So if you look on my website, you'll see there's reviews. One of the reviews is by an actual top clinical psychologist. Guy holds a master's degree in psychology. It's been around for decades. Read the book, loved it, wrote a review. And he said to me, there's this group near you, and you should go to their yearly conference as a presenter. I said, all right. I was not optimistic about this. So I jumped through all the hoops. I, filled out their form and everything. They wouldn't take me because I'm not in their box. Now, I already tried for many years to get Septemics to fit into some pre-existing niche. It cannot be done. It's like trying to get an elephant into a Volkswagen. It would be more truthful to say that all of these various subjects in which I am an expert fit into it. If you actually read the book, you'll see that it touches on a couple of dozen different major subjects in different ways, in different contexts. So this is a very big subject. And I discovered it and then spent 25 years perfecting it before I published it. Because as an engineer, which is what I am, I'm only interested in results and facts. So I had to create something that would work all the time for every person who could read English. And I know I succeeded at that because I've been watching people who respond to this for 29 years. People get it. This is not obscure. You don't have to be even a high school graduate to get this. If you can read English reasonably well, for example, Abraham Lincoln was a highly literate person. He went to, at most, 12 months of school in his entire life. Okay, so the fact that he didn't go to school didn't make him not literate. He would read this book and he would say, yeah, Jim, I understand this. This makes sense to me. So I went through a lot of trouble to make it accessible to the general public.
Okay, that sounds interesting. That sounds interesting. All right, that leads me to my next question. So in doing my research to prepare for today, I did see that you went to college to be an engineer, which is interesting. My son is also an engineer, so I'm always curious how the engineering mind works. It's very different from my own because I work with words. I went for journalism, and I've been a writer my whole life. Right. So I know that engineers are very matter of fact, and they have very hard rules generally. So how did you go from that to a sort of metaphysics and transcendental discipline like this that includes
so
this?
I should explain to you that I am a polymathic intellectual. My areas of expertise include psychology, philosophy, theology, parapsychology, science, engineering, mathematics, law, literature, history, metaphysics, military science, political science, physical culture, education, human potential, organization, and music. So all of that in my mind is one big blob of information. So although I started out in my training as an engineer and I had a career as a human development engineer, I have a polymathic understanding of life and people. And that made it possible for me to understand Septemics.
Okay, so how is Septemics beneficial to the average person?
Okay. I wrote this book to help people. I've had a lifetime of helping people. Each of these 35 scales provides the user with an infallible way of determining the salutariness or beneficialness of any group, individual, or activity. If the group, individual, or activity moves persons up the scales, it's beneficial or positive. If it moves them down, it's detrimental or negative. So I'm giving you a yardstick by which to measure human affairs, which is an entirely new concept. More importantly, uh, just finding out what level you or another person is at on any scale is by itself inherently beneficial and enlightening. Every time you correctly spot someone on any scale, whether it's yourself or another, you have a realization. You say, oh, Mary is at level 5 on the scale of control. That explains why she does bop, 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 bop. So every time you successfully use this, you get smarter. And when you go to another scale to use that, you bring that insight with you. So this is a virtuous cycle where the more you use this, the more insight you have. The more insight you have, the easier it is to use. The easier it is to use, the more you use it. And the more you use it, the smarter you get. So this just keeps going and going and going. There is no limit. There's no upper limit to this. Now you might say, well, what about if you have someone is at the top of all 35 scales? Well, I can tell you, fewer than 1% of the human race is at or near the top of every scale. That would be somebody like Jesus. A lot more people are at or near the bottom of all the scales, maybe 4%. And that would be like some professional criminal who's also a drug addict and a wife beater. You know, he's at the bottom of, or near the bottom of all the scales. That's why he's like that. One of the axioms of this subject, like any science, it has axioms. One of the axioms is, when a person is at or near the top of any scale, it's because he's insightful in that area. When a person is at or near the bottom of any scale, it's because he lacks insight in that area. So the common denominator of this whole thing is insight. Not only does it develop your insight, it requires some insight to use it. So if a person is at or near the bottom of a scale, he's going to have trouble using that scale because he doesn't have insight in that area. That's why he's at the bottom of the scale.
Okay. So
And
this is something.
To finish,
Okay, go
because
ahead.
you asked me how it's beneficial, the third
Yes.
thing is, once you know the actual level of a person on any scale, you can then improve that person by moving him up one level at a time. Now, this is monumentally significant because I have solved the gradient problem that has bedeviled mankind for 6,000 years. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Everybody who's a successful human development practitioner, whether it's a therapist, a facilitator, a coach, a teacher, they all know that human development must be done on a gradient. So you take a good algebra teacher, all right? He knows how to teach this subject. He knows the gradients. He has to explain to you what a variable is. He has to explain to you what an equation is, and so forth. So he takes you through the gradients. And by the end of 2 semesters, you know algebra. Okay? Now, the people who don't know that human development is done on a gradient are not good teachers or coaches or therapists. You cannot make an Olympic athlete out of a couch potato. Cannot be done. There are too many intervening levels. Now, you might be able to make a couch potato into a normal person, and then from there you might be able to make him into sort of a weekend athlete. You know, somebody plays softball on the weekend. But he'd have to go through 5 or 6 more levels to get up to being an Olympic athlete, see? And that is true for all of these scales. So each of these 35 scales is a roadmap for success in the corresponding area. And if I may, I'd like to tell you what those corresponding areas are so you'll know exactly what subject matter is covered in the book.
Okay, please do.
So there are 24 so-called individual scales, meaning they apply primarily to an individual, and there are 11 so-called group scales, meaning they apply primarily to a group. So these are the individual scales. I'm just going to read them off. The scale of basic purposes, the scale of personal influence, the scale of choice, the scale of permeation, the scale of thought, the scale of identity, the scale of evaluation, the scale of motivation, the scale of control, the scale of stopping, the scale of scholarship, the scale of literacy, the scale of human ability, the scale of memory, the scale of spiritual identity, the scale of mental deletion, the scale of aberration, the scale of physical fitness, the scale of justification, the scale of belief, the scale of equanimity, the scale of attack, the scale of conflict, and the scale of reaction. And these are the group scales: the scale of relationships, the scale of life spheres, the scale of government, the scale of civilization, the scale of survival, the scale of management, the scale of exchange, the scale of communication, the scale of allegiance, the scale of sexuality, and the scale of politics. Any one of these scales by itself could dramatically improve the life of the reader. And let me give you an example of how that might work. I mentioned the scale of motivation. One of the most important things to know about any person is motivation. Why is he doing this thing? That tells you a lot. That is how the police solve crimes. They look for someone with a motive, right? So they say, well, this guy doesn't gain anything by this guy dying, so he's not a suspect. Oh, but there's an insurance policy, a $500,000 insurance policy, and the wife is the beneficiary. See, that makes her suspect. Doesn't mean she did it, but that's how they go about this. So it's a very smart thing to know the motivation of a person you're dealing with on any level. So let's say you have a couple that's been dating for 3 years. They're talking about getting married. Wouldn't it be smart to ask, why does this person want to marry me? I mean, isn't that a reasonable question?
Yes.
I'm not saying to ask the partner, don't do that. Just get the book. Turn to the scale of motivation. There are only 7 levels, you see. There are only 7 basic human motivations. Now you might say, there are thousands of you. No, there are only 7 and all the others are subsets of these. So the guy knows what his girlfriend is like, and then he reads the book and says, oh, I can see. She wants to marry me because she loves me. That's level 1, the highest motivation of all, which is love. But maybe that doesn't happen. Maybe after he does this analysis, he says, now that I think about it, I think she wants to marry me because I drive a Maserati, I fly my own Learjet, I have a 60-foot yacht, I live in a $15 million condo, and I have $10 million in the bank. See, that's a different motivation. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it's different. Now, this could go a couple of ways. He might say, well, okay, yeah, lots of people want to marry me because I'm rich, but I really love this woman. She's everything I want, so I'm going to marry her anyway. See, could go that way, but it might not go that way. He might say, wait a minute, this woman is a gold digger. I don't want to marry a gold digger. I want to marry somebody who loves me for myself. And he might say, bye, we're done. Now, in that latter category, you might think he would be upset about that, and you would be wrong. He will not be upset. He will be relieved. He will say, Mel, thank you for showing me this. I dodged a bullet. I got out of this before she got into me for $15,000 a month alimony. See? He's going to be relieved, and he's going to be wiser the next time he goes shopping for a wife. He's going to look into that. Does this woman really love me, or is she after me because I can buy her a mink coat? See? So that can go a couple of ways. Now, you ever think about how many older, ugly, out of shape guys have beautiful young wives? Did you ever notice that? Sometimes I see this couple and say, how could this be? This guy he's 50 pounds overweight. He's gray. He looks like he never worked out in his life. And he's married to this Miss Texas, How does that work? Well, I'll tell you how it works. Miss Texas gets a mink coat, a diamond ring, a pearl necklace, a Corvette, and a credit card. The guy gets a 23-year-old beauty queen for a wife, so they're happy. See, for them it works. So this is very personal. There's no one size fits all. It's just, what is the truth of this? You see? So she comes to him, she says, honey, I want to go to Vegas for the weekend. He says, okay, here's $5,000, have a good time. She has a good time, she comes back, and he gets rewarded. So it works, you see? Now, some people don't want that. I mean, there are people who hide their money in order to prevent people from marrying them for their money. Okay? So this is all about motivation, isn't it? So that's really important. Now, let's say you own a car dealership and you need a new salesman. So you're talking to this guy, you're interviewing him, and it comes out in his rhetoric that he is a money motivated person. That's what's important to him. Money, money, money. Hire the guy. That's what you want. He gets a commission for every car he sells, so he's going to be in there hammer and tongs trying to sell these cars for you. Okay? So that is the motivation to hire this guy, that he's money motivated. You see? That might be the same guy who said, I don't want to go out with this woman because she's a gold digger. You see? It's the context. So that's how you use this. You use it in specific ways to figure out what's going on so you make the right choices.
Okay, that's great information there. And for my next question, I'm wondering, for you, when you began this journey, was your personal motivation to better understand human behavior or to find out how to direct it better or easier?
Well, now, let me just ask you about the question. When you say when I began, are you talking about when I started writing the book? Are you talking about when I began my career as a human development engineer? Are you talking about when I was a little kid in school? I mean, how far back?
Whenever you started to formulate the idea of Septemics.
Okay, so let me explain how this came about. At the age 16, I was accepted into engineering school. And of course, I thought at that time I was going to be engineering physical things like airfoils, motors, and gears, and things like that, like all the other engineering students. But by the time I had my bachelor's degree, it was clear to me that I wanted to engineer the human psyche because it is the area of greatest unknown, of greatest mystery. And more importantly, it is the area in which we as a race are failing miserably. 95% of the problems in industrialized society are because people don't understand people, don't understand the husband, don't understand the wife, don't understand the boss, don't understand the partner, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is a big thing, right? So I had a long career as a human development engineer using an engineering approach, engineering tactics, engineering devices, engineering knowledge to help my clients to attain higher levels of wisdom, responsibility, ethics, insight, et cetera, depending on the person. Now, all of my clients improved as a result of our interaction. But I started to notice incidentally that I could predict the outcome of the session. Now, I never told that to anyone, but I made notes. And as the decades rolled by, it became clear to me that the client would be at a specific level on a specific scale that I had previously observed. And as a result of our interaction, he would go to the next level up. Now, this happened thousands and thousands of times. Sometimes it would happen 6 or 8 or 10 times in the same session. Now, every time this occurred, it verified my hypothesis. Because you have to realize the clients didn't know anything about what I was doing, what I was writing down, what I was recording, how I was doing it. They had no idea. All the client knew is the guy had something he wanted to handle. Like, guy comes to me and says, Jim, I have this drinking problem. Can you help me? I say, sure, right? So now we're working on it, right? And after maybe 3 or 4 hours, he says, yeah, I just realized. I don't need this alcohol, and he stops drinking. Okay? That's like a normal pattern for my sessions, the way things would go. So he had no idea how I was analyzing this, what the biofeedback was showing me, etc. He had no idea. And I just kept writing it down. Now, by 1995, I had about 32 scales that I had simply observed. There's no theory of septemics. This is all based on direct empirical observation, which I recorded. So, at that time, I was pondering a difficult client, and I realized that this client was at a level on one of these scales that I had not previously observed. This was a 6-level scale that by then I absolutely knew was correct. But then I realized, there's a 7th level. Now, as soon as I saw what this level was, it was obvious to me where to insert it into the scale. That was not a question. And as soon as I inserted the 7th level into the 6th-level scale, it then manifested mathematically, meaning all of these data jumped out at me. And this scale went from being a line, which is what a scale is, to a plane, meaning a whole body of data instantaneously. Poof, just like that. So now I had this whole body of data interlocking with the scale that had all of these mathematical aspects to it. Now, when you read the book, it's not like studying mathematics. It's much more like putting on your eyeglasses and looking in the mirror, right? Like, obviously, I wear glasses. If I want to get a good shave, I need to use my glasses. If I don't use my glasses when I shave, I'm going to miss spots. So every one of these 35 scales is like a lens that you can hold up to the mirror and see yourself more clearly. Or you can hold up to your wife or your husband or your boss and see them more clearly. So let me give you an analogy as to how this works. Let's say, Mel, you find out that I'm into gardening and you invite me to your house to look at your garden. I say, great, I love flowers. So I show up at your house, right? And I go into your garden and I say, oh, Mel has hydrangeas, irises, tulips, roses, peonies, chrysanthemums. Now, obviously, I'm analyzing this, right? And the reason I can analyze it is I know a lot about flowers. Now, if you bring some average 5-year-old kid into that garden, he's going to see and smell exactly the same thing as I. But all he can say is, these are pretty and they smell nice. That's all he knows. He doesn't know the difference between a chrysanthemum and a hydrangea. He doesn't even know the words. Now, most adults are like that kid about people. They don't know what they're looking at. And that is why more than 50% of the adults in the United States are not married. And of the ones who are married, more than 50% of them get divorced. Obviously, they're not able to analyze this situation. So look, when I was a young man, this data didn't exist. I hadn't discovered it yet. So I made the same stupid mistakes that everybody else makes. So I got involved with people I never should have got involved with, and it was a train wreck. And, later I regretted it, But now, for me, that does not happen, cannot happen, will not happen, because I know this material. So for me, using this material is as difficult as drinking a glass of water. It takes a little bit of focus, a little bit of attention, little bit of balance, to drink a glass of water. It's not, you can't do it if you're asleep, So that's how hard this is for me, because I know the material. Now, I have to tell you, people get this. And the reason they get it is it's natural law. So, can you remember the first time you saw the Pythagorean theorem? Right? You might have been, 12?
It's been a while.
Right? Right? And you look, this makes sense to me. Right triangle If this side is 4 and this side is 3, this one has to be 5. See? And you've got it for the rest of your life. You can always use it. So you go out in your garden and you want to make a path diagonally across your garden. You don't need to measure it. You know what the two sides are, and you just calculate it. You know how long it is. And you can get it right down to as many decimal points as you wish. So that's what this material is like. It's like these scales exist in nature the same way Newton's 3 laws of motion exist in nature, the same way the periodic table exists in nature. Any scientist who you talk to will tell you, if we go to another civilized planet, right, that has airplanes and cannon and electricity, right, they are going to have the periodic table. Because until you get it, there's only so far you can go in science. Now, before Dmitri Mendeleev invented the periodic table, there was chemistry, but he revolutionized it by making it easier to learn, easier to teach, easier to understand. So now the periodic table is in every science textbook and science classroom in the world in whatever language they speak, because you get it, right? I can remember when I first looked at it. Oh yeah, hydrogen is here, and then helium comes second, lithium comes third, and it's all horizontal and vertical. It all makes sense. So originally he had fewer than, I think he had 79 elements originally. And now we're over 100, well over 100. So it works. So when they discover a new element, they know exactly where to fit it in. See? It's axiomatically true. That is what these scales are like. So let me tell you, a few people have said to me, what book is your book like? And having gone to school for 28 years, I have to say, I don't think there's ever been a book like this before, at least on Earth. And further, I can say, these 35 scales, every one of them is expressed in what you could call a table or a spreadsheet. And each one of those tables is very similar to the periodic table of elements, except it's for the corresponding 35 subjects that I read off to you 10 minutes ago. So there's a periodic table for basic purposes. There's a periodic table for personal influence. There's a periodic table for relationships. That is what these scales are. And because they are natural law, they are intuitive. People don't have trouble getting this. Now, I have been watching people deal with this information now for 29 years, since I wrote the first draft of the book. People get it. They get it right away. And I'll give you an example. About maybe 23, 24 years ago, I'm talking to a buddy of mine. This is while I was writing the book. We were talking about government and politics. And I had already devised the scale of government by then. So I said, wait a minute, let me show you something. And I pull out the scale of government and I hand it to him. I did not say anything. I just handed it to him. So he took it. He didn't even know I was writing about it. He took it and he looked at it. And in about a second, he pointed. And he said, there. He found his level on that scale without my even suggesting that that's what it was for. That's how easy this is to use. So many readers, this happens all the time. A guy's reading a certain scale, let's say the scale of control, right? He's just studying it, reading it. And he gets down to level 5 and he says, wait a minute, this is my mother-in-law. This is exactly how she behaves. Now look, I don't know this guy's mother-in-law. I probably don't even know the reader, right? There are people all over the world reading this book. I'm never going to meet them. So how did I get that so exact? I got it so exact the same way the Pythagorean theorem gets it exact. If you have a right triangle, you want to know the hypotenuse, it doesn't matter what dimensions we're talking about. It could be 1,000,000 miles against 3,000,000 miles. You can calculate it, okay? It's always true. And that's what these scales are like. It's intuitive. People get it. So when I show these scales to people, they look at it and they say, oh, yeah, I see this. This makes sense. So I already know this book is for anyone who can read English reasonably well and wants to improve himself or others. Now, you might think, as some do, that everyone wants to improve himself or others. And I'm sorry to tell you that's not true. There are many people who have no interest in improving themselves or others. This would include psychopaths, sociopaths, narcissists, professional criminals, corrupt politicians, war criminals, serial murderers, insane people, ignoramuses. There's all kinds of people who are not up to, either morally or intellectually, the idea of improving oneself or improving others. It's just not in their domain. So they would never read this book. If they did read it for some reason, they wouldn't understand it. And even if they did understand it, they wouldn't use it because it's contrary to their way of life. Because this is about making you more ethical, more responsible, more insightful, wiser. All of the virtues that we all agree people should have are furthered by this book, which is why I went through the trouble of writing it to help people to pursue that. So, a guy comes to this book, he finds a certain level, he says, oh, that explains why I did bop, 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 bop. I'm going to move myself up to the next level, which you can do. So when he gets up to the next level, he's going to be smarter, wiser, more responsible, have more control over his life, et cetera, depending on the context.
Okay, so what is the correlation between human phenomena and natural phenomena?
Well, human phenomena is a part of natural phenomena. I mean, there are all kinds of phenomena, right? For example, astrophysicists, they study celestial bodies, okay? That's natural phenomena. And then you have bacteriologists, they study bacteria. That's natural phenomena, right? Psychologists study human behavior or even animal behavior as part of psychology. That's part of natural phenomena. So the scope of this book is limited by human phenomena. It's not going to tell you how to fix your car if you have a mechanical problem or how to launch a rocket into space. Those subjects, that's auto mechanics and rocket engineering, okay? That's different. This is about people. Now, here's the thing. Everybody deals with people. Who doesn't? Even if you have a guy who has a hot dog stand, he has no employees, right? He goes in New York City, he goes down on 57th Street every day on the corner, sells hot dogs. That's his living. You can say, well, how's this going to help him? Wait a minute. He's got to deal with all of his suppliers. He's got to deal with all of his customers. He's got to deal with the government who gives him permits. This is all people. So in contemporary society, we're not, for the most part, dying from yellow fever and typhoid anymore. We're not starving to death. We're not being eaten by bears. You see, in developed society now, and industrialized, there's all kinds of welfare programs. There's access to food. There's access to health care. Okay, so the big problem is people don't understand people, and that is why we routinely elect idiots and criminals to run our governments because we don't understand them. So, look, I know the basic purpose of every president of the United States, going back as far as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and many of the presidents previous to him that I studied, such as Washington and Lincoln and Jefferson. This is not an opinion. It's as clear as knowing the difference between a tulip and a rose. Now, somebody who doesn't know anything about botany can say, well, how can you tell the difference between a tulip and a rose? Well, I don't know about you, but I don't have any trouble telling you the difference between. Every tulip in the world is unique, and every rose in the world is unique, but I can always tell the difference, and I'm sure you can too. That's just done now with people. So you can look at a person and you say, oh, Yeah, he's at the top of this scale. Oh, wait a minute, he's at the bottom of that scale. Most of us are high on some scales and low on others. That is the norm.
Okay, I just have a couple more questions left to wind down this conversation.
Okay.
And so with this one, this is a religious based question. So
Okay.
if you're a Christian or a devout adherent of another religion, does Septemics conflict or contradict those religions in any type of way, as far as you know?
Absolutely not. It's a philosophical science. Does biology conflict with Christianity? Does physics conflict with Judaism? Does chemistry conflict with Jainism? No, it's another thing. So it doesn't matter what religion you belong to, or even if you belong to no religion, it's irrelevant. And further, I can tell you that I know that this subject works for people across the spectrum. In other words, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, history, social status, religion, culture, economics, educational background, et cetera, it applies to everyone. Now, as I said earlier, it's not going to make any sense or be of any use to people who are not interested in improving themselves or others. I mean, if you get some guy who's in organized crime, he's not there to help you. He wants to clean out your bank account and steal your wife, right? That's his motivation. So you should give him this book. He's going to say, "Is this going to help me make more money?" Well, I don't know. Get out of here, take guy, right? Then they're not interested in self improvement. But I've actually calculated that approximately 50% of the human race is interested in either improving oneself or improving others or both.
Okay, and as a final question today, how can people get a copy of your book, or do you have any lectures or lessons online that people can educate themselves on Septemics?
Okay, there's several different questions there. Let me see if I can remember them all. It's very easy to find the book. If you go to a search engine and just type in Septemics, Septmics, you'll get hundreds of responses, including all the people selling the book. But I can tell you can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, anywhere the books are sold, so it's easy to get. But in particular, I want to invite your listeners to my website, which is septemics.com, where you can see what many readers have said about it, what many journalists have written about it, what the reviews are. You can read sections of the book itself, and if you wish, you can listen to a pre-recorded introduction to Septemics, which explains it to a new person in 15 minutes.
Okay, that sounds really interesting, and I'm really curious. So I'm going to get the book and read it for myself and see what I can learn from it.
Great.
Our guest today has been Jim Marshall. Jim, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been a great learning experience.
Thank you, Mel. It was a pleasure.
So that's it for this week's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another great storytelling journey. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
That was Stories from Real Life. Join us again next week for another great storytelling journey. See you next time.